Kelly and I are back doing something we haven't done in a long time, and that's a prisoner exchange. I am Mike at Official Pagan on everything. This is Bog Panda, and joining me, as always,
Hi, everybody. I'm Kelly at KELLYTHUL on Twitter, the app formerly known as, I guess that is Twitter. So this is messing me up. How about Instagram? On Instagram, the app formerly known as Twitter, Threads, and Facebook. We have a Facebook page for Bog Panda, by the way. Just so you know, give it a like sometime, maybe. And after you give that a like, more importantly, get over to the YouTube to Bog Panda, subscribe to that bad boy, listen to a few of the videos, leave us some comments. We love hearing from you. While you're on the YouTube channel for Bog Panda, you will also find Hard No, the world's shortest podcast. Many episodes for you to enjoy with very little time commitment. And while all that's going on, you may want to jump over to the merch store and pick up some of the fine t-shirts we have to offer, including Look Away from the Monsters.
excellent stuff. So, for anybody who doesn't remember, because it's been quite a while, the prisoner exchanges are where Kelly and I introduce the other person to an album they're either not familiar with or maybe aren't that familiar with that was important to us and something we want to kind of introduce them to. Mine's a little bit different this time though. It's not the album I would have chosen from this artist. I would have chosen their album The White Room, which is their best-selling album, but it's not commercially available anymore. In fact, none of their music was commercially available since the early 90s when they decided to delete their entire catalog after becoming the best-selling British singles band. They thought the best way to celebrate that was to delete their entire catalog. They showed up at an award show where they were up for Artist of the Year. They fired machine gun blanks at the crowd and then killed a sheep and threw its body at the awards after party.
And I know
Then,
you're all thinking this is Hanson. I know
I
you all
know,
are thinking this is Hanson, but it's not.
then they took a boat to an island off the coast of Scotland and burned £1,000,000 of their own money that they had made making those albums. That would be $2.3 million today that they set fire to. And after that, they just did more weird shit and refused to talk about their music for 23 years after signing a contract saying that they would no longer discuss their music. See, unlike bands like Kiss and Motley Crue who pretend to retire or make a secession of touring contract that's fake, they really did it. And there's way too much to talk about the just insane stuff that they would do that enthralled me as a kid. And I think was probably what really got my interest going in like shock rock and things like that, except their music doesn't fit that at all. It's like imagine Gigi Allen, but when you played it, it really was. It's this weird juxtaposition of who they were versus what they sounded like. And that's actually a part of their weird art experiment to prove how stupid pop music is, how stupid you are for listening to it, and how easy it is to manipulate pop culture. Way too much to say about them, but I will mention things as we go on specific songs. Like I said, their entire catalog was pulled from release. They did release a series of compilation albums in the past couple of years. This is like a best of album. Most of the White Room album is on here along with a few other singles. So it's the best place to start as far as what is legally available. Now, Kelly, had you heard of KLF or were you familiar with any of these songs?
I only heard of KLF and some of these crazy stories from you in just kind of past conversations because I knew this was, taxing on the runway as a potential prisoner exchange, but you'd kind of step through. It's going to be a little tricky because it kind of like, obliterated their catalog. And so I had, but until you had started to talk about them, I knew nothing of them. I knew nothing of the machine gun incident, the X sheep, all that kind of stuff, until you exposed me to that.
It's good stuff. I mean, their original idea for the award show was that Bill Drummond, who was a record label executive who quit to start the KLF, was going to chop his own hand off and throw it into the audience. He was talked out of that. And then he wanted to chop up the sheep on stage while buckets of pig's blood were dumped on the audience. They wouldn't let him do that, and their backing band for that particular performance were all vegan, and they strongly opposed that as well. So they settled for shooting at the audience and killing a sheep and throwing its body at everybody. So that was the toned down performance.
That's art.
Yeah. My favorite thing about them, and I think the easiest way to sum them up, and if anybody's interested, there's tons of documentaries about them and interviews and stuff on YouTube that you can find of all sorts of crazy stuff they are doing, including right now where you can sign your body over to them when you die and they want to make a pyramid out of their fans' bodies. That's a real thing. So pop music. And
yeah, and
there's tons of cool stuff about them that you guys can go out there and find. What I like about this particular collection, though, I guess we should mention the cover. The cover is very, very minimalist. It's meant to look like a mock-up of their early self-released singles, which just, would have a solid color, bold lettering on the front of it. Very simplistic. Any thoughts on the cover, sir?
I thought it was minimalistic, but kind of cool. Definitely still would catch your eye if you're going through back in the day when you could go through a record store, see rows and rows and rows of vinyl and flip through the records. This would be when you stop for a second, because it's just, even though it's simple, it's got a punch to it. So I liked it.
Well, the first song on here is Doctor in the TARDIS. So KLF weren't always called KLF. They were called the Justified Ancients of Moo, a name they took from a cult sci-fi book series about a secret society dedicated to causing chaos in the world. Except they were getting sued a lot and spending a lot of money on videos and self-releasing their own albums and singles. So they were kind of strapped for money. And the Justified Ancients of Moo name was tied up in all kinds of legal battles. The most notable of that was with ABBA, who did not like their mock version of Dancing Queen that they had released. So to try and mend fences, they did go to Sweden. They filmed this, of course, and found a prostitute they felt looked like one of the singers from ABBA and apologized to the prostitute as their proxy. Did not smooth things over with ABBA. You might be surprised to learn that did nothing to mend those fences.
Yeah, because I read a little bit more about that, because one of the kickers was ABBA was in England at the time.
That sounds right.
There was that.
I also
prostitute stopped by.
I don't want to speak for them. I don't know how sincere they were about apologizing to ABBA. So I'm just suggesting. I'm just going to throw it out there. So they decided they needed some money because they were hemorrhaging money at that time. So because, pop music is stupid and easy to make, and pop music fans are stupid, they could just easily ignore the more punk rock oriented first couple albums and just make a pop song, and it would make them tons of money. It would definitely go to number one. So they decided they came up with a formula to do this, and they decided that nostalgia baiting and getting sports fans behind them was the way to go. So because they're from England and Doctor Who was a big deal there, and people were hitting that nostalgia age for that right around then, they took the Doctor Who theme song and did a mashup with rock and roll from Gary Glitter before he was in prison. That's important. when it was still required by law all over the world to play rock and roll at every sporting event. They did a mashup of those songs, which they even played with Gary Glitter live on Top of the Pops, where they dressed in ceremonial robes and hoods in order to perform the song, as one does in these things. A lot of people laughed at them for doing this and said there's no way that you can just make a number one song like that. And they also made it a point to point out that they made the dumbest lyrics they could possibly write to the song, which is repeating Doctor Who 4 times and then saying the TARDIS. That is the entirety of the lyrics to the song, other than some random spoken stuff scattered throughout. They also pretended that their lead vocalist was a talking sentient car and released interviews with the car. The song did, in fact, go to number one. It charted in 8 different countries, and they wrote a book about it called The Manual How to Get a Number One the Easy Way. Other bands wrote songs using the manual just to see if they could recreate it, and they did. Other bands had number one singles using the exact same formula. I mean, in a weird way, it's kind of the most punk rock thing I think anybody's ever done. But the song, again, as you're going to see multiple times throughout this album, really doesn't match that. What did you think when you heard this? Are you a Doctor Who fan?
So I'm not. So there are a lot of folks who are Doctor Who fans who are major kind of Alice Cooper fandom, our Alice Cooper fandom level fans. There's people Doctor Who run really deep and passionate. I'm not one of them. I'm a big Third Doctor Tom Baker fan. That was always the Doctor Who seasons that I liked the most. But I haven't really plugged in lately. I watched a little bit when they started to, I don't know what to call it, reboot it, but it kind of returned. And that was kind of interesting. David Tennant, of course, was huge in it for a while. But not an avid Doctor Who guy, but certainly familiar with the music I was hearing, and stupid enough to have it be my favorite song on this album. uh, I the Gary Glitter stuff, of course, it's per the formula, they're right on the money for that. The interesting insight that I had never really connected the dots before, is that the Daleks are probably the original prototype for metalcore singers, because I would say a Dalek sounds a lot like most metalcore singers.
That's fair. And there's more metal to come on this album later.
A little later, yep.
Well, moving right along, the next song that appears on this, and again, most of this album is sourced from the White Room album. So this is pretty close to the White Room, just with some scattered other singles replacing the non-single tracks on there. What Time Is Love is the next song. So they started off as more of like a weird punk rock rap group called the Justified Ancients of Mumu, or the Jams for short. Then they came up with this idea of like, we can make pop music and make money off of it and mock the music industry. So they came up with this idea of a genre after doing the Doctor Who song, Doctor in the TARDIS, of a genre they called stadium house music, which was basically a mix of 80s pop rock and dance music, but with echoey effects, like it's being played like they're an arena rock band, essentially. That became a thing. Like there was a lot of bands doing that after them. This song in particular was a gigantic hit. It samples the MC5. This is actually how I first heard the MC5. Was the opening sample there. I was like, what's that from? And that is credited, of course, on the album. So I went out and listened to the MC5 because of this. It's the sample from Kick Out the Jams, which again, the Jams is what they used to go by. KLF was the name of their label, which stood for Copyright Liberation Front, which is what they switched it to after being sued for copyright infringement. So, which they changed their name to. This song was a big deal, not just because it was a big hit, but it was actually covered by dozens of other bands after this came out, including a band. I don't know if you would have ever heard of them. Terrible band. Don't go look them up. They're called U2. This song is the basis for the Paul Oakenfold mix of Even Better Than the Real Thing, which is one of their biggest hits off their second best-selling album. So it was a number one hit for them, a number one hit for U2, and a minor hit in covers for other bands. So this song was a big deal. I don't like this song as much as some of the other ones on the album, but it introduced me to the MC5. And I mean, obviously it had a major impact on music.
Yeah, I like the song. It doesn't supplant my easily lured into being the Doctor Who TARDIS fan. So it didn't.
That was the point, though. You're proving their.
Yep, I am the test case for that. It was interesting. So Kick Out the Jams kind of made my way to it on a similar but different path, because a Blue Oyster Cult live album, I believe it was perhaps Extraterrestrial Live, starts off. But it starts off with the big scream, "Kick out the jam, brothers and sisters," is the way that the Blue Oyster Cult version begins. This one begins slightly different than that. You still start out with "Kick out the jams," uh, and I don't know if you'll buy into this or not, but I almost got just hints, just a little oregano here of Vanilla Ice, um, a little bit in the vocal delivery. So um,
I can see
uh,
that.
kind of a roughed up, Ice Ice Baby delivery in some of the things. But yeah, dance. It was interesting too because I really didn't know where this was going, and that kind of remained consistent throughout the listen because it's like it goes lots of different places. But I got kind of some of the core elements of what they did with the sampling and stuff like that. But I like this song. I like the Kick Out the Gyms reference. Yeah.
All right, moving right along. That brings us to 3 a.m. Eternal. This is actually my favorite song by KLF. This was the song that introduced me to them. A friend of my dad's got the single of this. He was a DJ. He gave me the single to listen to. And this is actually what introduced me to the idea of synth pads, which are kind of the ominous droning tones that you can do with a synthesizer, particularly analog synthesizers. This album, Solid State Logic, the compilation, is actually named after the Solid State Logic mixing boards that they would use when they were recording their albums. So this is really what introduced me to synthesizers. I mean, obviously new synthesizers existed, but I didn't know you could make weird, ominous sounds with them. So this is what introduced me to that. And they're the band that actually introduced me to ambient music as a whole, because they made, prior to the White Room album, which we'll get to later, they made an ambient album, which is still to this day considered a really influential ambient record, the one that they put out. So as I dove deeper, I got more into ambient music. So this is actually 100% what started me down the path of making music, was this song. Also too, going back to, they did influence a lot of things. There was a new technology that was starting to pop up called cell phones. It was kind of a flash in the pan thing at that time, and they decided to sample these cell phones on the song because they thought they would become an important part of life moving forward. So cell phone ringtones are used and sampled and distorted into this, along with using recording vocals to give it a cell phone kind of sound to it, as something that's being spoken through a phone, as if we would carry these things around with us everywhere someday. Can't
Craziness.
imagine. What did you think of this one, sir?
So I mean, there wasn't anything on this album I disliked. So I liked everything. I I didn't fall in love with this one versus some of the other ones, in terms of what I've kind of gone through so far. Formula still working for Doctor Who. But yeah, I liked it. And then I saw kind of through the track listing to say, they're getting another whack at it here later. With
Comes back.
and so I said, yeah, I'm gonna, okay, I got this one. I'll keep it in the bank, and we'll see if I like the next version better. Which spoiler alert, I did, but might have been the Machine Gun Fire. I don't know. So, like I said, I liked it. But I mean, I think some of the stuff you mentioned was uh, very. I mean, this gets a little redundant to talk about creative approaches to things with this group, because they certainly bring that in spades. So, but like I said, I enjoyed everything on the album, but this version didn't leap to the top to me as much as the later one.
Makes sense. So that brings us to Last Train to Trans Central. There are recurring themes of fictional places and different things, mostly inspired by cult sci-fi stuff that they bring into it. Trans Central is, they took the name from some science fiction stuff. That's what they named their studio, that they built inside a house they were squatting in their early days, which remained their studio when they were recording number one singles and stuff there. Again, weird juxtaposition of stuff for the band. Not my favorite song on the album, but again, was another big hit for them. For me, I guess it just doesn't hold the same appeal of a couple of the other songs that are about to come up.
Yeah, so at the very, there have been many many songs where you say, okay, there's a train motif, there's something kind of coming in here, so I'm going to give you uh, something that calls back to a train one way or another musically. A lot of different approaches to do that. Thought theirs was an intriguing one and a very good one. I'll still kind of stick with Captain Beefheart's Bat Chain Puller as the most demented, fun train thing to kind of listen to. But it was pretty good. I thought the towards the tail end of the song, the keyboard and then some big organ. They're short parts, they're not huge, but it was the kind of a nice additional twist to it that kept the song pretty interesting, as all the songs are. But like I said, good solid effort on the train thing. No Beefheart, but pretty solid on the train thing. And the keyboard stuff was great at the end.
Makes sense. All right, so now we're up to another one of my favorites. It's Grim Up North. This is a slightly remixed version of one of the songs from their ambient album, Chill Out. That album is important because so at the time when they were just starting KLF was very different sounding than this. Jimmy Cotty, who was one of the other members of KLF, was DJing in a club that was owned by Paul Oakenfold, who, produced that U2 song that sampled KLF later. He was DJing in a club by him. Him and one of the other DJs were specifically put in a room where they would throw people who maybe had a little too much to drink or too much of other things. And they were supposed to play soft, mellow music to calm those people down. That was their kind of thing. So they decided to start making their own ambient music and kind of testing it on those people since they had a sort of captive audience of these people who could barely move at that point. So they created an ambient group called the Orb, who are very famous in ambient music. Jimmy Cotty, while he was working on the first album for the Orb, though, also pitched the idea of doing an ambient record to Bill Drummond of KLF, and KLF made an ambient album, which ended up coming out before the first Orb album and caused a lot of problems within the Orb because they felt like KLF was kind of stealing their thing now. So, which is, I can't disagree with that outlook on it. I'm sure I probably would have felt the same way. Their ambient album, though, was a big deal in ambient music. It inspired a lot of ambient people, ambient artists and fans and things like that. The album did run into some issues, though. It was an ambient concept album about a fictional trip that they would take that would take them across the country and into some other areas and things like that, mostly into places they had never even been. And there's segues on the album where they're like listening to distorted radio clips in the background, which again were uncleared samples, which caused some problems for the album. It was still a really big album, though, but you'll probably never get the original version of some of those songs again. A slightly remixed version of the album, this is one of the songs from it, was released as part of this compilation series. So you can kind of get an idea of it, but it's not the original thing. Another thing that was important with the ambient album is there's a lot of steel pedal guitar in it because Bill Drummond is a big country music fan. That's coming up again. Spoiler alert. That's about to come up. So there's some sneaky ambient country in there too, but this is a song I always really liked. Like I said, they were entirely my introduction to ambient music.
Yeah. So cool song. They kind of work whistle call in at the beginning. Very, very cool. And apparently when I took my notes, I didn't remember this, but I must have been on a trampoline as I was taking my notes. And so remember I talked about the keyboard stuff. Let's pretend I'm talking about it now for this song, because it actually shows up. Thanks for just indulging me on the last one. It was Tubular Bells type of thing for the previous song. On this one, this is the one that had the kind of I thought cool keyboards and bigger organ at the end, but just kind of a rich soundscape on a lot of stuff there. Fun, as fun as the song with the title, it's Grim Up North can be. So, but cool song.
Yeah, it's one I always really liked. So then was the remix of What Time Has Love, America, What Time Has Love, also a big hit. Just a remix of that song, though, so I don't really have much to add to it versus what I said about the original song. Did you have anything to say, sir?
On which one?
America, What Time Is Love?
Oh yeah, so a couple things on that. I picked up of almost a Schools Out guitar riff at the beginning of that, which I thought was pretty cool. And then we've kind of talked a little bit about um, uh, sampling from a lot of diverse sources and stuff like that. So the West Side Story America stuff was uh, not surprising to hear, given kind of what had happened already. And I saw it, and I go, I wonder if, and sure enough, but it was cool. But yeah, so not much to add except those kind of those little flourishes. And so it certainly wasn't a riff for riff Schools Out at the beginning type of thing. But as I heard it, I go, that's almost the progression that I am used to hearing at the end of an Alice Cooper concert. So
Could be.
good stuff.
All right. So the next two songs, the last two songs on this compilation, are probably the two that are worth talking about the most. So they had a song that they had been working on that they've been kicking around since one of their earlier records. So this album, The White Room, where most of this is pulled from, was actually their fourth full-length album. There was two albums as the jams, then the ambient album, which was the first one as KLF, and then The White Room, which was their biggest. They've been kicking around the music for this song for a while, and they couldn't get the vocals right. As you've heard, there was, female vocalists and rappers and things that had popped up on songs that obviously were guest artists. They tried recording it with their guest vocalist that they usually worked with. They tried doing it with them doing the vocals as they did on the early stuff and on the last song, and they just couldn't get it to work. So jokingly, since as I mentioned on the ambient record, Bill Drummond played a lot of steel guitar on there because he's a secret country fan, or was secret at the time country fan. And Jimmy Cotty used to make fun of him for it. And he jokingly said, why don't we just get Tammy Wynette to sing it? So being a big country fan, he was like, that's a great idea. Let's reach out to Tammy Wynette and see if she'll do it. And because they already had a bunch of hit singles at this point now, following their method of how you go about easily
no dead sheep yet.
Yeah, no dead sheep at this point. They had done plenty of weird stuff already. They didn't get to the darkest, weirdest stuff, but it was getting weird. So they reached out to Tammy Wynette. There's good interviews with her about it, talking about getting that call, having no idea who they were, but being at that stage of her career, figuring what does she have to lose? Might as well give it a shot. They're a successful band. Let's see what happens. So she went in and sang it. They were both pleasantly surprised at how great the song turned out. But Jimmy Cotty was most surprised, the one who jokingly suggested her when they showed up to do the music video with her. He thought she was Dolly Parton. So when he saw Tammy Wynette, he was very confused because his sarcastic suggestion was supposed to be Dolly Parton, and he didn't know the difference between the two of them until he saw Tammy Wynette. So she wasn't even the person he meant to jokingly suggest to sing the song. But it turned out really well. Again, another number one song for them. I never really loved this song as a kid, and especially in comparison to a lot of their other stuff. I get it. I get the joke of it, that this group is doing a song with Tammy Wynette. It's even funnier to me knowing that he meant Dolly Parton and didn't know the difference between them until he physically saw her. Not one of my favorite songs, but I do love the story behind it.
Yeah, so this song confused me on kind of multiple levels. Because the big so while it is Tammy Wynette, and while it is the vocal style, you can, the voice, you recognize the voice as Tammy Wynette's voice. But oddly enough, even though the country vein is there, there's almost a little bit of the 50s girl group, little bit of gospel kind of.
Yeah, I can
There's
see that.
like 6 different music strains everything but Japanese hip hop going through this thing through Tammy Wynette, who's multicultural singer, just kind of does many different things. So no big shock there. But I just had a hard time wrapping my head around going, I don't know what groove this is hitting yet exactly. It was a good song, but I just remained confused through most of the song.
I think a lot of people were, but I think that was probably ultimately the appeal of the song, just kind of the novelty of what is this? What's
Because
happening?
we're stupid and we're gonna like the Doctor Who song.
What is this? What's happening? But and there's a great interview with Tammy Wynette when she talks about from her perspective showing up on the video set and seeing people in ceremonial robes and hoods and guitars and things and sheep wandering around and just thinking like, what is this? What's happening?
And she's probably used to the hoods. So,
they were different color when she was
okay. Allegedly, to be no offense intended.
Yeah.
maybe I'll back off of that.
Yeah. That was all Kelly. I just want to point that out. So that brings us to the final song on here. It's 3 a.m. again. So they made their big commercial album, The White Room. At the same time, while they were putting that together, they started plotting a second half to it. It was going to be like a two-part concept. The other part of it was going to be called The Black Room. And The Black Room was going to be the complete opposite of the White Room album, which was a pretty poppy, almost dance kind of album. This was going to be a metal album. And they'd enlisted the band Extreme Noise Terror to help them out with doing a lot of this stuff. Extreme Noise Terror are the ones who joined them for the live version of the song. And prior to their performance, they did a small run of singles of this to promote the Black Room album. And if I remember correctly, on my original copy of the White Room, I think somewhere in there was like, look out for our next album, the Black Room, like some sort of reference to it was on the packaging originally, I believe, as well. I think that's how I initially heard of it. So there was a small run of this single that went out to like fan club people and stuff like that. I don't think that prepared the audience at the Brit Awards for what happened, though. And even if you take out the Dead Sheep and the Machine Gun and stuff like that, I think if they had even just played the song, people would have still been very confused and shocked at what was going on. So Extreme Noise Terror was their backing band on it. Their vocalist did the chorus to the song while Bill Drummond and KLF did the verses to the song. It's the same song. It's all the same lyrics, all the same structure and everything. I'm going to say played a little faster,
a little bit,
a little more aggressively. We talk a lot in our Alice Cooper reviews about how sometimes live performances can have a little more grit to them. I would say that this is one of those examples.
Quite a bit more grit to it. So Extreme Noise Terror are vegans?
Yes. Yeah.
I would not have guessed that. Just on in a just kind of book cover. Surprise!
They were horrified by the idea of chopping up the sheep on stage and dumping pig's blood into the ground. They were very much
go out on a limb and say even some non-vegans might be horrified.
Would have been pretty
chopping up a sheep on stage. Just maybe. I mean, I could see a guy eating a burger still going, "That ain't right." Don't do that. But yeah, so I like this version better. And I think it's fair when you mentioned it, but just maybe to remind the viewers, there were blanks in the machine gun.
Yeah, that's fine.
So you can fire. It wasn't, even if there wouldn't have been, they were firing over the crowd. So
right.
So
zero danger.
It's just safer than driving a car. So. Just this whole collective was a very eclectic, kind of just way different. And then you just kind of read a little bit about the exploits of these folks. Clearly, artistically minded. I think it's awesome to be that committed to your art. I'm hard pressed to say I'd be committed to anything enough to burn millions of dollars of money. It just seems like I'd like to get out of squatting in a house and actually own one. And if I had
You're
the
one
means,
of those guys.
but they need to do they. So good for them.
That's true. They also, to be fair, did give some money away around that time too. They gave $40,000, I believe it was, to an artist who they deemed the worst artist of the year, which was some pop singer. She had won some sort of songwriting prize and gotten $20,000. So they announced they were giving her $40,000, which they nailed to a piece of wood and chained up like outside her house or something insane, for naming her the worst artist. And this was prior to them burning the equivalent now of $2.3 million. Yeah.
Like you do.
Like most pop bands have done. You think back to the greats, the New Kids on the Block, NSYNC.
It's the same old story. You hear, every behind the scene, behind the music, and then
like,
they
you
burned
remember
$1
that
million.
time the Backstreet Boys took all their fans on a ferry to an island where they had constructed a full-size Wicker Man and then set it on fire while everybody danced around it in ceremonial robes, just like that. And that, again, real thing that happened. That was a real KLF show.
Yeah. I'll stick to listen to a compilation album.
I definitely recommend checking out the compilation album. Did you at least enjoy it, sir?
Oh yeah, I did.
Okay.
I said super creative, intriguing. You'd kind of mentioned it was going to be fun. Now I always struggle a little bit because like your definition of fun and mine don't always line up 100%. But I was like, I feel like that this is going to be some adventuresome listening, and it was. But it was cool and interesting. And then you start to peel back some of these other stories about, trying to hunt ABBA down, flying to hunt ABBA down in Sweden, and then they're back in England. Stuff like that just makes the whole thing richer. So
Hiring Tammy Wynette because they thought she was Dolly Parton.
Yeah, all good stuff.
Yeah. All great stuff. They also, a couple years ago, published a new book. I definitely recommend reading the manual for anybody who's, interested in music and things like that. It's a fun, sarcastic, poking fun at themselves too, because they're a band like Scream is a movie. Like Scream is a slasher movie, but it's also a parody of slasher movies where the characters are aware they're in a slasher movie. So as much as they're mocking pop music artists and people who listen to it, they're making pop music at the same time. So they're very self-aware of this and the contradictions of it. And again, I feel like it's fun. It's ridiculous and weird and fun. And that's why I always like them. And do I wish their albums were still available? Yes. But that's part of what makes them weird. And I don't know if people would still be talking about them almost 40 years later if they weren't as weird and over the top. So
yeah, mission accomplished on that.
They did publish a novel a couple years ago. Anybody who's interested, it's called 2023. It's about a dystopian future where they're like heroes in it. The one review that I read of it, which I believe they used as a blurb, started off with, "What is art?" Which I think kind of sums up their whole career.
Bog Panda.